My husband slid a postnuptial agreement across our kitchen table 19 days after my cancer diagnosis and said, "It's just paperwork in case something happens." I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Where do I sign?" What he didn't know was that I'm a forensic accountant and I'd already spent 2 weekends inside his company's books. He wanted a signature. I gave him one. Then I gave him Exhibit A. "Good evening, and thank you for spending this hour with me. It's Nora. If you're new here, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you know. And do me a kindness. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from tonight. I keep a running list. It's become one of my favorite things about this whole strange endeavor. I need to start before the paperwork, because the paperwork only makes sense if you understand what I do for a living, and what my father did before me. My name is Margot Dunlap. My father was Ellis Dunlap, and for 31 years he ran a bookkeeping practice out of a converted dentist's office on Bull Street in Savannah, Georgia. 2 rooms, a window unit that rattled, and a fireproof cabinet he was so proud of that he'd knock on it when he passed. He did the books for shrimpers and funeral homes, and one bar that never once turned a profit on paper and somehow never closed. He used to say numbers don't argue. They don't get emotional, they don't take sides, and they never, ever forget where they've been. I was 11 when he first let me tie out a bank reconciliation. He gave me a mechanical pencil and a ledger sheet and told me to find the difference. It took me 4 hours. It was a transposed digit, a check written for $86 recorded as $68, $18. He looked at it for a long moment and then he said, "There it is. Not good job. Just, there it is." Like the number had been waiting for me to come find it. I became a forensic accountant. Not a tax preparer, not an auditor, forensic. I get called in when somebody suspects money has walked out a door it shouldn't have. Divorces, embezzlement, insurance claims, partnership disputes. My job is to sit with 3 years of statements and find the $18. Then find where the $18 lived and who fed it. I met Reed Ashford at a Chamber of Commerce mixer at the Bohemian Hotel on the rooftop, with the river going brown and slow underneath us. I was 35 minutes into hating every second of it. He was arguing cheerfully with a bartender about whether an old-fashioned should have a cherry in it. He lost the argument and drank it anyway, cherry and all, and made a face, and laughed at himself. That was what got me. A man who could lose in public and think it was funny. He was 30 and running freight for his uncle's brokerage. I was 26 and 2 years out of my CPA exams. We were married 14 months later at the cathedral, and I wore my mother's veil, and my father cried during the readings and pretended it was his allergies. We had 12 good years, or 11 and a half, depending on how honest I've decided to be that particular day. Reed bought out his uncle's stake and rebranded the company Ashford and Coyle Freight Solutions, Coyle being a partner who existed mostly on letterhead. We bought a house on the Isle of Hope with a bad roof and good bones. We got a dog before we got the roof fixed, which tells you everything about our priorities. He's a coonhound mix named Dewey, and he's the only member of this story who behaved well from start to finish. We tried for a baby for 6 years. I'll say that once and not linger on it because it isn't the story, and because I've learned that when you linger, people start to feel sorry for you, and pity has a way of making you smaller than the facts warrant. 2 losses, then nothing. Then a long, quiet negotiation with myself that ended in something I'd call peace on my better days. My father died in April of the year before all this. Pancreatic, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral, and I sat with him for 9 of them. He left me the practice which I closed, and about $190. 000 in a Vanguard account. He'd built one boring index fund at a time, and a warehouse. That warehouse matters. So pay attention to the warehouse. It's in Garden City, out past the port terminals, 11,000 square feet on a little under 2 acres, with rail access on one side and a truck apron on the other. Dad took it in 1998 as payment from a client who was going under and who had nothing else to give him. For 25 years, it sat there earning modest rent from a company that stored boat parts. Dad thought it was a joke, his one bad investment. He called it the barn. By the time he died, the port of Savannah had become the third buzziest container port in the country. Everything within 8 miles of it was worth a fortune to somebody who moved freight for a living. My father's joke was worth, by the appraisal I got in July, a little over $2 million. It came to me by inheritance. In Georgia, inherited property is separate property. It is not marital. It stays mine unless I do something foolish, like retitle it into both our names, or commingle it, or sign an agreement. Now hold that thought. In late August, I found a lump in the shower. I was thinking about a client's payroll file, and my hand went where hands go, and there it was, on the upper outer quadrant of the left side, about the size of a peppercorn, hard, fixed. Not the kind of thing that rolls away from your fingers. The mammogram was on a Thursday. The ultrasound was the same day, because the tech went very quiet and then very kind, and I know what quiet and kind mean. The biopsy was the following Tuesday. On September 9th, at 4:15 in the afternoon, a surgical oncologist at the Lewis Cancer and Research Pavilion told me I had invasive ductal carcinoma, stage 1, grade 2, estrogen receptor positive. She said the word curable before she said the word cancer, which I've since learned they teach them to do, and which I'm grateful for anyway. I sat in my Honda in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I didn't cry. I opened the Notes app on my phone and I typed lumpectomy, sentinel node biopsy, oncotype DX, radiation 4WK, Spoxfen 5 years. Then I typed tell Reed. Then I sat there and looked at the concrete pillar in front of me and felt my heart going and thought, very clearly in my father's voice, "All right, where's the difference?" I told Reed that night at the kitchen table. He said all the right words. He held my hand. He said, "We'll beat this, and whatever you need." And he got up and got me a glass of water I hadn't asked for, and while he was at the sink, with his back to me, he checked his phone. Twice. I want you to understand that I noticed it, and I filed it, and I said nothing. Because at that moment, I did not have room in my body for a second problem, and because there is a version of a woman I have never wanted to be, and she is the woman who audits her husband's face. 19 days later, he made room for it. It was a Sunday. The good kind, cool for September, the marsh grass just starting to turn gold out past the dock. I'd made coffee. He came in with a manila folder and set it on the table next to my mug, and he sat down across from me and folded his hands, and I watched him arrange his face into something borrowed. "Marg," he said, "I've been talking to Warren about some estate planning. Warren Tisdale is his attorney, golf buddy, does closings and LLC filings and thinks of himself as a shark because he once made a subcontractor cry." "Okay," I said, "with everything going on, if something, God forbid, but if something happened, the way things are titled right now, it'd be a mess. The company, the house, the barn. It'd get tangled up. I just want it clean. For both of us. For both of us. As if I were the one who needed protecting from confusion. As if I hadn't spent my entire professional life untangling exactly this kind of mess for other people. As if I, 19 days into a cancer diagnosis, were the party in this marriage whose affairs required urgent clarification. I opened the folder. Postnuptial agreement. 22 pages, and I read it the way I read everything, which is to say slowly, from the back, because the back is where the money lives. Exhibit B was a property schedule, and on it, listed under marital property subject to division, was 1140 Coleman Boulevard, Garden City, Chatham County, the barn. My father's joke, recharacterized in a single line of 11-point Times New Roman from my separate inheritance into a veritable asset. There was also, in Section 9, a fidelity provision. Boilerplate, or dressed up as boilerplate. Either party who engages in adulterous conduct during the marriage forfeits any claim to the other party's separately held business interests and waives entitlement to spousal support. Warren Tisdale had written that clause to frighten me. That was its only function. It was a hand on the back of my neck, a reminder that a sick woman with no children and no leverage should be grateful. I lifted my eyes from page 19 and looked at my husband of 12 years in the kitchen of the whose house roof paid to replace, and something inside me came to rest, not rage. It was cleaner than rage. It was the feeling I get at 11 p.m. on the third night of an engagement when the subledger finally ties, and the fraud is no longer a suspicion. It's a shape, and I can see its edges. He was projecting. Men do it constantly, and they think it's subtle. He had put a fidelity clause in front of a woman who hadn't been alone in a room with another man in a decade, and he had done it because it had crossed his mind. Because it was already true somewhere. He wasn't protecting himself from me. He was rehearsing. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "You'll sign it?" "Of course, sweetheart." I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. And I smiled at him. And I want to tell you that smile cost me nothing. I'd want my own attorney to look at it. Otherwise, it's not enforceable anyway. And then we've done all this for nothing, he exhaled. He'd braced for a fight. He'd probably scripted it in the car. "And Reed?" I said. "I want a full financial disclosure attached, both sides, Exhibit A. Every account, every entity, every liability sworn and certified." He waved his hand. "Sure. Whatever Warren says, it's standard." I said, and I got up to rinse my mug, and I turned the water on, and under the sound of it I felt my hands begin to shake. Here's what he didn't know. In Georgia, a postnuptial agreement is not automatically enforceable. The Supreme Court of this state laid out the test decades ago in a case called Scherer. 3 questions. Was the agreement obtained through fraud, duress, mistake, or the misrepresentation or non-disclosure of material facts? Is it unconscionable? Have circumstances changed such that enforcement would be unfair? Non-disclosure of material facts. He wanted my signature so badly that he was going to hand me a sworn document, certified under penalty of perjury, listing everything he owned, and I already knew he was going to lie on it. The next 3 weeks were the loneliest of my life, and I say that as a woman who watched her father die. Nothing changed on the surface. That's the part nobody tells you. We ate dinner. We watched the same nonsense on television. He drove me to my pre-op appointment and sat in the waiting room with his knee bouncing and looked, from a distance, like a worried husband. He may even have been one. People contain a great deal, but I had stopped being married. I was living inside the shape of a marriage. The way a shell keeps the shape of a thing that's no longer in it. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I did what my father taught me. When I'm frightened, I count. I sat down with a legal pad and I wrote out what I stood to lose. The house, we bought it for $310,000, and both names are on the deed, and I'd put my inheritance nowhere near it, which was luck disguised as caution. My father's Vanguard account untouched in my name alone. The barn, worth $2.1 million and change, sitting in the crosshairs of Exhibit B. And then the last line, The one I wrote and looked at for a long time. My body. 6 weeks out from surgery. 4 weeks of radiation after that. 5 years of a drug that would make my joints ache and my sleep unreliable. And a man in my house who had chosen this particular window to ask for a signature. I want to be careful here. I don't think Reed Ashford wanted me to die. I think he thought about it, the way you think about the weather. I think that somewhere in the machinery of him, a door had opened, and behind it was a version of his life where the freight brokerage owned a warehouse on rail access 8 miles from the port, and the woman who'd made his coffee for 12 years was a photograph in a hallway. And I think he'd decided the paperwork should be in order either way. That's the part I've never fully put down. On a Wednesday, I took a personal day and drove out to a coffee shop on Skidaway that I'd never been to, far from anyone who knew us, and I sat in the window and I asked myself 3 questions. What do I actually know? A folder. A folder. A fidelity clause. A man who checks his phone at the sink. What would I need? A paper trail, not a feeling. A trail. What's the first move? Not a confrontation. Not an accusation. A lawyer. I searched for family law attorneys in Chatham County with experience in complex asset cases, and I read the reviews the way I read financial statements, which is to say, I ignored the summary and looked for the disclosures. 3 names came up more than once. I emailed all 3. I said nothing about my husband. I said I needed a consultation regarding a post-nuptial agreement, and that time was a factor. Corinne Maddox called me back herself in 90 minutes, which no attorney does. She'd spent 11 years at a corporate firm in Atlanta doing mergers before she came home to Savannah and switched to family law. She said, on the phone, "You're a forensic accountant," and when I said yes, she was quiet for a second, and then she laughed, once, very short, and said, "Then we're going to have a good time. Can you come Friday at 2? Her office is on Drayton, in a townhouse with a fireplace nobody has used since 1970. She's about 60, silver crop, reading glasses shoved up into it, and a legal pad she didn't touch for the first 40 minutes. "Tell me all of it," she said. "Don't tidy it." So I didn't. The 6 years of trying my father. The barn, the lump. The parking garage. 19 days, the folder. Section 9. When I finished, she took her glasses down off her head and cleaned them on her sleeve. "You haven't signed." "No." "Have you confronted him?" "No." "Good, don't." She put the glasses back on. "Here's the landscape. Georgia is an equitable division state, which does not mean equal, it means fair, and fairness is argued. Inherited property is separate. It stays separate unless you do something to convert it. You have done nothing. As of this morning, that warehouse is yours the same way your kidneys are yours." I laughed. It surprised me. It was the first thing that had been funny in a month. "Now," she leaned forward. "You told him you wanted a full sworn disclosure attached as an exhibit." "Yes. Do you have reason to believe he'll be less than complete?" I thought about the sink, the 2 glances, the way he'd said, "We'll beat this," like a line he'd read somewhere. "Yes." "Then let me be very precise with you, Margot, because this is the whole ball game." She held up one finger. "If he signs a certified disclosure and it is complete in a material way, the agreement is voidable under Scherer. That's the first thing. Second finger. If you and he filed joint federal returns during any year in which he moved money he didn't disclose to me, that's a second matter, and it isn't a family court matter. Third finger. And if there is a Section 9 in that agreement, and he wrote it, and he's the one who's in breach of it." She stopped. She didn't finish the sentence. She just looked at me over the glasses. "He asked for it," I said. "He did," she said. "We'll see that he gets it." At the door she gave me a list. "Don't move money. Don't make large purchases. Don't close accounts. Don't say a word to him that you wouldn't say in a courtroom. Don't post anything anywhere, ever. Then she said, "One more. What state are we in?" "Georgia." And Georgia is a one-party consent state under OCGA, Section 161162, which means if you are a party to a conversation, you may record it, and you do not need to tell anybody. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, ma'am. Say it back to me. If they come to my house and open their mouths, I record it. Good girl, she said, which from anyone else would have made me furious, and from her felt like being handed a rifle. The evidence didn't hide. That's what nobody understands about this work. Fraud isn't clever. Fraud is lazy and tired and running late. I started where I always start, which is the tax return, because a tax return is a confession you sign every April. We filed jointly. Married filing jointly, Form 1040, with a Schedule E for the rental income from a duplex we owned on the west side, and a Schedule K1 from Ashford and Coyle Freight Solutions, an S corporation in which Reed held 80%. I had for 12 years signed those returns in the kitchen with a pen he handed me, without reading them, because he was my husband, and because that is what trust looks like from the inside. I pulled 3 years of them from the cloud drive. I made a spreadsheet. The K1 ordinary business income for the most recent year was $412,000. The year before, $478,000. The year before that, $455,000. Revenue up in all three. Income down. Something in the middle was eating. I couldn't get at the company's general ledger, but I didn't need to. The distributions came into our joint account at Ameris, and the joint American Express had been in my name too since 2016. Both of those I had every legal right to look at, and both of them Reed had forgotten about entirely, because to him the Amex was a card that lived in his wallet and not a 19-page monthly document with a searchable PDF. It took me 4 nights. There was a recurring ACH debit, $1, $533 on or about the first of every month going out for the last 14 months to something the bank rendered as TW Prop MGMT, not our duplex. Our duplex is managed by a woman named Enid who takes checks. There was a charge at Levy Jewelers on Broughton Street. $3,140 on February 11th. I had received on February 14th a pair of gardening gloves and a book about the Okefenokee. There was a Delta reservation for 2, Savannah to Charleston, which is a 90-minute drive, and which is a flight you only take when you don't want your car parked somewhere. And there was, in the memo field of a $2,000 transfer out of the company operating account into an account I couldn't see. 4 words. Consulting. Tidewater Advisory. I want to tell you what I did next, because a lot of women write to me and say they wouldn't know how to start, and the answer is that you start with things that are free and public and legal. I went to the Georgia Secretary of State's Corporations Division website. It's a search bar. It costs nothing. It takes 11 seconds. Tidewater Advisory, LLC. Organized in Chatham County 13 months earlier. Registered agent and sole organizer, Delaney Pruitt. Then I went to the Chatham County Tax Assessor's site, which is also free and public and legal, and I looked up 1140 Coleman Boulevard and confirmed what I already knew. And then, because my hands were already moving, I typed in the address that TW Property Management had been collecting $1,533 a month against, which I found on the H detail once I called Ameris and requested the full trace. It was a 2-bedroom on Whitaker Street, 9 minutes from Reed's office. Delaney Pruitt was 29. Her LinkedIn said Business Development, and before that it said Ashford and Coyle Freight Solutions, and before that it said a logistics firm in Jacksonville, Professional Headshot. The kind of smile that has been photographed on purpose. 14 months, $2,000 a month in consulting fees, from a company in which I held, by marriage, a 20% economic interest, rent on an apartment, jewelry, a flight to Charleston. By my count, and I counted 3 times, Reed Ashford had moved $47,180 of marital money into the life of another woman. I did not scream. I want to be honest that I thought about it, and I thought about it specifically the way you think about a door you could open. I stood at my kitchen island at 11 at night with the laptop open and Dewey asleep on my foot, and I felt the shape of a sentence rising. How long have you been paying Delaney Pruitt's rent? And I felt how good it would be and how much it would cost. I closed the laptop. I photographed nothing on the shared computer. I logged in from my own laptop on my own hotspot to a cloud account under an email address I'd made in 2014 for a continuing education course and never linked to anything. I saved everything twice. I made a log, dates, times, amounts, in a file named Q3 Reconciliation Beaufort Client, buried 3 folders deep, because nothing on this earth is more invisible than a spreadsheet with a boring name. Then I emailed Corinne Maddox. I have documentation. Can we meet this week? Bring everything, she wrote back in 9 minutes. Tuesday 9 a.m. Don't bring the original of anything now. The signature. Reed asked about it twice that week, both times in a light voice, both times while doing something else with his hands. I said Corinne was reviewing it. He said, Corinne who? And I said, Maddox. And he didn't know the name, and something in his shoulders eased, and I thought, you should have Googled her. Corinne sent Warren Tisdale a red line. She made 4 changes. 3 were cosmetic, designed to be conceded. The 4th was Exhibit A, a mutual financial disclosure schedule, listing all accounts, entities, business interests, and liabilities of each party, executed under oath with a certification that the disclosure was true, complete, and correct. Warren pushed back on the certification language. Corinne offered to remove the arbitration clause in exchange, which she'd inserted in the red line solely so that she could remove it. Warren took the trade and, I imagine, told Reed he'd won something. On the 17th of October, 4 days before my surgery, my husband and I sat at that same kitchen table with a notary named Deb who does mobile closings and who was very sweet to me about the scarf I was wearing. Reed signed Exhibit A. He listed the company. He listed the operating account and the money market and his 401 nay, and the truck loan and the duplex. He did not list Tidewater Advisory LLC. He did not list the lease on Whitaker Street. He did not list a single dollar of the $47,180. He signed under a line that read, I certify under penalty of perjury that the foregoing disclosure is true, complete, and correct. Then he handed me the pen. It was a cheap blue Bic. Deb the notary was watching. My husband was watching. And I want you to know exactly what I felt, because it was not triumph. I felt sorrow, enormous weather system sorrow, moving through me slow. Because for 1 second I understood that if he had come to me at any point in 14 months and said, Margot, I've done something unforgivable, I would have had to decide something, and now I didn't. He had taken the decision away from me and put it in a folder and asked me to notarize it. I signed my name, Margot Ellis Dunlap Ashford. Deb stamped it. Reed kissed the top of my head and said, Thank you. I know that wasn't fun. I said, It's fine. It's done. 4 days later, they took a 2-centimeter tumor and 3 lymph nodes out of my left side. And the nodes were clear, and my oncotype score came back low enough that I wouldn't need chemotherapy, and I cried for the first time in 6 weeks in a recovery room in Savannah with a warm blanket over my knees, out of relief and out of a grief I couldn't have named at gunpoint. Reed was there. He brought a smoothie. He'd asked the nurse what I could have, and she'd told him, and he'd gone and gotten it. I want that on the record, because people are not one thing, and I have never been interested in a story where they are. Corinne filed on the 11th of December. By then I was 3 weeks into radiation, driving myself to the Lewis Pavilion every weekday morning at 7:40, lying on a table with my arm above my head while a machine hummed at me for 90 seconds. The skin under my arm had gone the color of a bad sunburn. I was tired in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. She filed anyway. She said sick isn't weak and waiting isn't strategy. And she was right, but I hated her a little for it that week. Reed was served at his office on a Thursday morning. He called me 6 times before noon. I let all of them go. He came home at 3 in the afternoon. He'd brought his mother. Coralie Ashford is 71 years old and chairs the board of a historical preservation foundation and has raised, by her own accounting, more than $4 million for the restoration of buildings in a city that would restore them anyway. She wears linen in October. She has never once in 12 years said anything to me that could be repeated back to her as unkind, and she has never once made me feel welcome. I saw the car pull in. I stood at the upstairs window with a cup of tea and watched them sit in the driveway for 4 minutes, their heads turning toward each other, deciding who would speak first. I went upstairs. I set my phone face down on the coffee table, screen off, and I pressed record before I opened the door. Reed was holding a white paper bag from Back in the Day Bakery, which is where we used to go on Saturday mornings the first year we were married. A prop. He'd thought about it and chosen it and carried it up my walk. "We just want to talk," he said. "No lawyers. Just us." I opened the door. I didn't offer them coffee. I sat in the wing chair and left them the couch. And I waited, and Coralie arranged her handbag on her knees, like a woman preparing to conduct a meeting. Reed started. He talked for 6 minutes. I've listened to the recording since, so I can tell you it was 6 minutes and 11 seconds. He talked about stress, about the diagnosis, about how frightened he'd been. He said he'd handled it badly. He said I panicked. He said the paperwork thing was stupid. I see that now. Warren pushed me. He did not say the name Delaney Pruitt. He did not say the words affair or apartment or money. He said fear over and over, as though what he'd done to me was a weather event that had happened to us both. Then Coralie took her cue the way she'd been waiting to. "Margot, honey, you are 3 weeks out from radiation. I'm 4. 4, she smiled. "Sweetheart, you are not in any condition to be making decisions of this magnitude. Litigation is brutal. It's expensive. It goes on for years. You have no one here. Your daddy's gone. God rest him. You don't have children, and Reed is the one who's been driving you to those appointments. I drive myself. You know what I mean." "I don't think I do, Coralie." She set her hands flat on her handbag, and I watched the warmth come off her face like a bedsheet pulled off furniture. "Then let me be plain with you," she said, and her voice dropped and got precise, which is a thing certain Southern women do that is more frightening than shouting. "This is Chatham County. Judge Halloran and my brother-in-law have played at the landings every Saturday for 26 years. That attorney you've hired is perfectly competent, but she does not have relationships. We do. You can fight this, and you can spend the next 2 years of a life that has recently been shown to be shorter than you assumed, sitting in a hallway on the 3rd floor of a courthouse. Or you can accept something reasonable and keep your health and let this family be generous with you." She leaned back. "Don't mistake good manners for weakness, dear." I let the silence go on. 3 full seconds. I counted them. I never have, I said. I hope you'll extend me the same courtesy. Reed said, Mom, in a small voice, and I looked at him. And I saw the thing I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. He was afraid, not of me, of her. Reed Ashford has never negotiated anything in his life. Coralie negotiated his admission to Benedictine. She negotiated his first apartment lease and his uncle's buyout and, I would later learn, a matter involving a young woman in 2004 that was settled with a check. When he brought his mother into my living room to discuss the end of my marriage, I understood at last that it was not an insult. It was a confession. He had never once done a hard thing without her, and he wasn't going to start with this. You're not here to reconcile, I said. You're here because a legal process turned out to be more serious than you expected. Those are different things. There's an attorney's number in the paperwork. Coralie stood. She looked around my living room the way you look at a rental. You are making a serious mistake, she said, and here is the only sentence in this entire story that I have never once regretted. No, ma'am, I said. I'm making a ledger, and your son's name is on the wrong side of it. They left. The bakery bag stayed on my coffee table. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the dishwasher, and Dewey came and put his enormous head in my lap, and I shook for about 10 minutes, hard, the way you shake after a near miss on the highway. Then I got up and I emailed Corinne the audio file with a one-line message, for the file. She wrote back, perfect. I want to skip the next part, and I'm not going to, because it's the part I most needed somebody to tell me back then. I fell apart in December, quietly, efficiently. I would like to report that I was a warrior, and I was not. I stopped eating anything that required a pan. I answered texts within 4 seconds because being needed felt like being alive. I told everyone I was doing great, and I said it in a voice I could hear myself using. My oldest friend is a veterinarian in Macon named Tessa Rowe. We've known each other since we were 15, and she has never once in that time let a thing go. She drove down on a Saturday without asking, knocked on my door with 2 grocery bags and said, "You've been answering me too fast. You do that when it's bad. You're managing me." I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours, and I told her the real version instead of the presentable one, including the kitchen floor, and including the thing I hadn't said out loud, which was that some nights I lay in the dark and wondered whether he'd been counting on the cancer. Tessa didn't reach for me. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You're doing every single thing right. And that's what's making it so lonely, isn't it?" I put my head down on the table and cried like a child. She stayed 3 She had strong opinions about my curtains. She made me laugh twice, genuinely, which I had not done since August. Corinne had already suggested in her offhand way that I find a therapist, not because I was in crisis, she said, but the way a runner sees a physical therapist before a marathon, not after the injury. I found Dr. Helen Ostrander through the Cancer Center. In our second session, she said the only 2 things anybody said to me that whole year that I still carry around: that I had confused strength with solitude, and that accepting help is not the same as losing control. I don't know how to explain what that did. I wasn't lighter afterward. I was more consolidated, like a structure that's had a beam sistered in. The mediation was on the 6th of February in Corinne's conference room, with the space heater going, because that fireplace still doesn't work. Reed arrived in a navy blazer with no tie, the studied informality of a man who's been coached to look reasonable. Warren Tisdale had a rolling briefcase. Reed did not look at me when he came in, And that told me more about where we stood than anything his attorney said in the next 4 hours. Corinne built it slowly. Timeline of the marriage, the house, the duplex, the K1s. Warren objected out of habit. Reed answered carefully, the way people do when they've been given a script and are trying to remember which line comes next. Then Corinne slid a document across the table. Mr. Ashford, do you recognize your signature on Exhibit A to the postnuptial agreement dated October 17th? Yes, us, and you certified this disclosure as true, complete, and correct. Yes, under penalty of perjury. Warren said, Corinne, I'm reading the document he drafted, she said pleasantly, and slid another page across. Mr. Ashford, are you familiar with an entity called Tidewater Advisory, LLC? The room got very quiet. I could hear the space heater tick. That's a vendor, Dover, a vendor. Corinne set down a printout from the Georgia Secretary of State, organized 13 months prior to your certification. Sole organizer and registered agent Delaney Pruitt. Miss Pruitt was, until 15 months ago, an employee of Ashford and Coyle Freight Solutions. Is that correct? Reed looked at Warren. Warren was reading. She left the company, Reed said. She did. And then your company began paying her $2,000 a month for consulting services. $28,000 to date from an S corporation in which my client held a marital interest of 20%. She laid down another page. Can you describe the consulting services? Silence. Mr. Ashford, is there a Form 1099 on file for Tidewater Advisory? Warren put his hand on Reed's arm. Too late. Corinne kept going, and she never raised her voice. Not once. The ACH detail from Ameris, TW Property Management, 14 consecutive months. The lease on Whitaker Street, the Levy Jewelers charge on February 11th, paid on a joint card 3 days before a Valentine's Day on which I received gardening gloves. Reed's face was doing something he couldn't stop. Total documented expenditure of marital funds, Corinne said, $47,180. None of it appears on the disclosure your client certified. Warren, you understand that under Scherer, this agreement is void. We understand your position. It isn't a position, it's arithmetic. She reached into the folder one last time. And now I'd like to direct everyone to Section 9 of the agreement, Mr. Ashford's counsel drafted. Either party who engages in adulterous conduct during the marriage forfeits any claim to the other party's separately held business interests and waives entitlement to spousal support. She let it sit. Mr. Ashford wrote that clause. He put it in front of a woman 19 days after her cancer diagnosis, and on the day he signed it, he had been paying another woman's rent for 14 months. Warren said, "We'll need a recess." "Of course," said Corinne. I stood at the window while they were out. Drayton Street below, a delivery truck double parked, a woman walking a small furious dog. I thought about a 38-year-old sitting in a parking garage in September with a notes app open, typing the word lumpectomy, and I thought she didn't know what was coming. But she knew how to count. There was one more thing, and Corinne had held it. "Before we adjourn," she said, when they came back, "my client is in possession of a recording, lawfully made under Georgia law, of a conversation that took place in her home on December 11th. In it, Mrs. Coralie Ashford refers to a personal relationship between a member of her family and a sitting judge of the Superior Court of Chatham County, and offers it as a reason my client should abandon these proceedings. We have preserved it. We have not yet decided what to do with it." Warren Tisdale closed his eyes. That was the moment, not the money, not even Delaney Pruitt. It was Coralie's own voice in my living room on my telephone telling me exactly how the world worked. The word settlement was said out loud 11 minutes later. It took 5 weeks. Corinne did not ask for $1 more than the law allowed, and she did not accept $1 less. The postnuptial agreement was voided by consent. The warehouse at 1140 Coleman Boulevard was confirmed as my separate property, my father's joke, unmolested. I kept my Vanguard account. I kept the house on the Isle of Hope, with the roof I'd paid for, and Reed was bought out of his equity in it, at a figure that reflected, among other things, $47,180 of marital funds spent outside the marriage. Georgia courts have a name for it: dissipation. It's a beautiful word for something ugly. Like watching a puddle disappear. I received a portion of the business interest structured as a note payable over 60 months secured. Corinne insisted on the security. Warren fought it for 2 days. He lost. And I did one thing that wasn't in the settlement. I filed a Form 8857 with the Internal Revenue Service, a request for innocent spouse relief for the tax years in which I had signed a joint return reporting income from a company that was routing money through an LLC with no 1099 on file. My name came off that liability. I did it in an afternoon at my own kitchen table with a mechanical pencil, and I thought of my father the entire time. I did not report Reed. I want to be clear. I did not have to, because when the IRS grants innocent spouse relief, they notify the other spouse. And when the other spouse's business is a small S corporation with a consulting expense it cannot document, questions get asked. Not by me. Delaney Pruitt left him in October, 8 months after the settlement. I know this because Savannah is a city of 90 square miles and 1 conversation. And because a former colleague of Reed's told me at a barbecue, without any apparent agenda, the way people relay a weather report. There had been arguments, he said, about money. Her name was on an LLC that had begun receiving mail from the Department of Revenue. She had, at some point, retained her own attorney, and I understand that attorney advised her to be extremely cooperative and extremely truthful about the nature of her consulting arrangement, which I understand she was. The apartment on Whitaker Street turned out to be difficult to afford on one salary once a court order had put a claim on the other one. I sat with that news for a while, waiting for it to feel like something. It didn't. That surprised me more than anything else in this whole story. I'd been braced for a small, mean joy, and instead there was only a kind of flat quiet, the way a room sounds after the air conditioner cuts off. Whatever had attached me to that man, the love, the trust, the fury, the fear, had all resolved into a single fact. He was a man I used to be married to. That was the whole of it. Coralie called me once, in the summer, about a set of my grandmother's serving pieces that had ended up at her house in 2019. Her voice was stripped of every ounce of honey. It was the working voice, not the performance. I said I'd send someone for them, and I thanked her for calling, and when I hung up I stood in my kitchen and waited to feel triumphant and felt, instead, nothing at all, which is its own kind of peace. She had built her whole threat on relationships, on the idea that a name means something in a county, and that a woman alone, sick, childless, salaried, could be made to understand her size. But nobody ever asked Judge Halloran a thing. There was no hearing. There was a spreadsheet and a Secretary of State website that costs nothing, and a Bic pen and a certification Reed Ashford signed of his own free will. Because he could not imagine that the woman across the table had spent her entire life finding the $18. Resources are not the same as evidence. Connections are not the same as being right. There is one thing I never solved. For 9 months, from the March before my diagnosis until the December he was served, a debit of $412 left our joint account on the 14th of every month, coded only as an ACH transfer to a numbered account at a credit union in Brunswick. Corinne subpoenaed the routing. It came back to a trust I'd never heard of, and the trust had a name that meant nothing to me, and the trail went cold in the way trails sometimes do. And it was $3,708 in a case worth $2 million, and Corinne said gently that there is a point at which pulling a thread costs more than the sweater. So I let it go. I still think about it. Some nights, lying in the dark, I turn it over, and I've come to suspect that I don't actually want to know, and that this is the first time in my life I've been able to leave a difference unreconciled and sleep anyway. My hair thinned out from the tamoxifen for about a year, and then it came back darker, which nobody warns you about. My last scan was clean. I go every 6 months, and I sit in the parking garage afterward for a minute before I drive home, out of superstition, and I text Tessa the word clear, and she sends back a photograph of whatever animal is on her table. I closed nothing and started something. Dunlap Forensic Accounting, 2 rooms above a print shop on Abercorn. It's my father's name on the glass, not mine and not Reed's. Most of my clients are attorneys. About a third of them are women in the first 4 weeks of understanding that the man they married has been moving money. I tell them the same thing every time. Don't confront him. Don't cry in front of him. Get a lawyer, and then get a pen, and then go find the $18. I leased the barn last spring to a company that stages containers for the port. The rent is more than my father made in his best 3 years combined. I had the roof done, and I left the old sign up, the one that says Dunlap in letters he painted himself in 1998, flaking now, crooked, ridiculous. Tonight I'm on the back porch. It's September again. The marsh is going gold out past the dock, and the tide is doing that thing where it looks like it isn't moving at all and is in fact moving very fast in one direction. Dewey is a warm weight across my feet. There's a glass of wine next to me that I'm allowed to have now, and a stack of bank statements I'm going to read in the morning. I'm 40. I own a warehouse and a bad-roofed house, and a business with my father's name on it. Nobody in this world has any claim on any of it. I thought, when it was over, that I'd feel victorious. I want to be honest with you about this because I think the honesty is the only thing I have to offer. When you win something you should never have had to fight for, the victory arrives strange and secondhand. There's relief, deep, bone-level relief, the kind that makes your eyes sting. There's grief for the life that was supposed to have existed, the one with the smoothie and the recovery room, and a man in it who meant it. And there's something harder to name underneath both, a sobriety. The knowledge that you understand things now about yourself and about other people that you did not understand before, and that this knowledge was not free. But underneath all of that, quiet and steady, is a woman on a porch on the Isle of Hope with a clean scan and a dog and a ledger that finally ties. My father was wrong about one thing. Numbers don't argue, he said, and they don't take sides. They don't argue. That part's true. But when you find the difference and you set it down on the table where everybody can see it, they take a side. They take a side so hard that a man in a navy blazer with no tie will look at a single sheet of paper he signed him to his own kitchen and understand that the ground he's standing on was never there. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read everyone.